You're welcome to the lecture Fundamentals of Web Programming. In this 8th chapter of Basics of Web Design, we will look at responsive layout basics. Today's lecture on responsive web layout basics will equip you with learning outcomes such as how to describe the purposes of CSS flexible box layout, how to configure a web page that applies CSS flexible box layout, how to describe the purpose of CSS grid layout, how to configure a grid container, how to configure grid rows, grid columns, grid gaps, and grid areas, how to create responsive page layouts with CSS grid layouts, how to configure web pages for mobile display using the viewport meta tag, how to apply responsive web design techniques with CSS media queries, how to apply responsive image techniques using the picture element, and how to apply responsive image techniques with the IMG elements loading attributes. CSS flexible box layout known as Flexbox. The Flexbox layout provides for a flexible responsive layout that is best used for one dimension, such as a row or a column. The display property configures a flexbox container, such as attributing flex values. The flex item are known as child element of the flex container. The flex wrap property determines whether flex items are displayed on multiple lines. We have such values as no wrap, which is default. We also have wrap and wrap reverse. The flex direction property configures the flex flow direction. We also have values such as row, which is default. We have column, row reverse, as well as column reverse. Diagram of a flex container. Flexbox is a one-dimensional layout method for arranging items in rows or columns. Item flex expand to fill additional space or shrink to fit into smaller spaces. A flex container can vertically center a block of content inside its parents, making all the children of a container take up an equal amount of available width or height, regardless of how much width or height that is available. This will finally make all columns in a multiple column layout adopt the same height, even if they contain different amounts of content. The justify content property. The justify content property configures how the extra space along the main axis should be displayed. It also defines how the browser distributes space between and around text items along the main axis of a flex container and the inline axis of a grid container. As we can see on the slide, the justify content property aligns the flexible containers item when the item do not use all available space on the main axis horizontally. More flex properties. The align items property configures how the browser displays extra space along the cross axis. The flex flow property shorthand to configure flex direction and flex wrap properties. The order property causes the browser to display flex items in different order than they are coded, whereas the gap property configures flex between adjacent items and shorthand to configure column gap and row gap. The flex grow property. The flex grow property specifies how much the item will grow relative to the rest of the flexible items inside the same container. Take for instance, if the element is not a flexible item, the flex grow property has no effect. Let's jump into the code and explore flex grow property. Here we are in the code. I've created document type HTML. I opened the HTML, the head, and the style, and I have also closed them accordingly right below. But let's go back to the top and see what we have within the style. So within the style, I'm just going to highlight it all the way down. So within the style, we have the body selector, where we have everything we want to see within the body, such as the font family. We have the text decoration color, the background color, the padding left, and the padding right. And within the style, we also declare some heading. We declare a color and give it this property. The font size, we give it 60 points. For the paragraph, we gave the font size 20 points. And for the paragraph color, we gave it these color values. We declared a dot flex container and we made its display to be flex. We assigned stretch to its align items and we gave these color values to the background color. And further down, we declare a dot flex container, and so we align this color value to its background, to the actual lines around the box. We assign 10 pixels for the margin. We assign center to the text align. We assign 75 pixels to the line height. We assign 30 pixels to the font size. So we close the star, and further down, we have the body. So within the body, I'm just going to highlight the body from open to close. So within the body, we have our heading, the H1, and we have a paragraph, and we have our class, the flex container, and we have all our styles, 1, 2 to 3, and we close the body. And finally, we close the HTML. Right from the document type, we open the HTML, we open the head, we open the style, and within the style, we declared all that we want to see within the body, and we close the style. And further down, we close the head. And we now open the body where we want to see everything we declared within the style. So we went ahead to enter all the details we want in the body, and we got to the end of the body. We close the body and we close the HTML. So right now, we're going to see how the flex grow property looks like in the HTML page. So right now, we can see the flex grow property. This is how it looks. I can zoom in and zoom out for you to see how it looks. So you can see how number 1 grows and how number 2 grows and how 3 grows. So I'm just zooming back. So let's jump back to the code and change these values and see how they grow. So right in the code, for the first value, I'm going to allow it to grow up to 4 inches. And for the second value, I'm going to allow it to grow up to 2 inches. And for the third position, I'm going to allow it to grow into, say, 10 inches. Okay, we're saving the file and we're jumping back to the HTML page to see the changes. Right now at the HTML page, we're going to refresh the page to see the changes. Now I've refreshed the page so you can see the changes has occurred. Now let's jump back to our code to change it again to see how it looks like. So position number 1, we give it 4 inches. Let's try 10 inches. And position number 2, let's leave it at 2 inches. And position number 3, let's give it 4 inches. We save the file and we jump back to the HTML page. So back to the HTML page, let's refresh the page and see what happens. For position 1, we gave it 10 inches. For position 2, we gave it 2 inches. And for position 3, we gave it 4 inches. So you can see how they stretch back and forth. Hence, this is why they are called flex grow property. Configure flex items. A flex container expands item to fill available free space or shrinks them to prevent overflow. Most importantly, the flex box layout is direction agnostic as opposed to the regular layouts. The default flex items are flexible in size and allocated the same amount of space in the flex container. The flex property customizes the size of each flex item. It indicates the flex grow factor as well as the flex shrink factor. It can be used to indicate a proportional flexible item. CSS grid layout. The CSS grid layout model offers a grid-based layout system with rows and columns, making it easier to design web pages without having to use floats and positioning. CSS grid layout excels at dividing a page into major regions or defining the relationship in terms of size, position, and layer between parts of a controlled build from HTML primitives. Some uses of grid layouts are to configure a two-dimensional grid-based layout. The grid can be fixed in dimension that is flexible and responsive. The display property configures a grid container, such as assigning grid for its display values. Configure grid columns and grid rows. Grid tracks are defined in the explicit grid by using the grid template columns and grid template rows properties, or the shorthand grid or grid template properties. Tracks are also created in the implicit grid by positioning a grid item outside of the tracks created in the explicit grid. Grid columns and grid rows. This exercise is just to show different grid columns and different grid rows. As you can see, these are grid columns and these are grid rows. So the top one is the header, the middle one is the main, there's the right, and there's the footer. This is where we have the menu for the grid. Let's jump into the code and try to make some changes to this grid. Here in the code, I've created a document type, HTML. I open HTML, head and style. I'm going to highlight the style so we can walk through it. Okay, let's go back to the top style. So right from the top, we have all our 5 items and we're giving values to the grid area. The first item has header for its grid area. The second item has menu for its grid area. And the third item has main for its grid area. And the fourth item has right for its grid area. And the fifth item has footer for its grid area. And further down, we had the body section where we declared everything we want to see in the body, such as the font family, the text decoration color, background color, padding left and padding right. Further down for the text, for our headings, we have these color values and the font size. For the paragraph, we have these color values and the font size is set to 20 points. We also have a div color to these values. And further down, we have another set of text where we have the H1 color set to this value and the font size set to 60. Our paragraph color was set to this value and the paragraph font size set to 20 points. Our div color is set to this value. And further down, we create a grid container and we set the display to grid. And for the grid template areas, we assigned templates such as header, 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 menu, main, main, right, right, menu, footer, 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 and footer. Further down, we give 10 pixel for the gap and this color value for the background color. And lastly, 10 pixel for the padding. And further down, we declared a grid container for the div and its background color is this value. The text align is center. And we can also transform the text to uppercase. At this point, I've commented it out. We have 20 pixels for the padding and for the font size is 30 pixels. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is to comment out the text transform. I want you to see how it looks like after it has been commented out. So I've commented out the text transform. I've made it uppercase at this time. So I'm going to save the file and jump to the HTML page. So here we are at the HTML page. I'm going to refresh the page and you will see it has turned all this to uppercase. It has changed everything within the grid to uppercase, but they are still centered. I could change the values to bring them to the left or to bring them to the right. Let's jump back to the code and make some more changes. So here we are at the code. We'll have to change the heading font size from 60 to 120 points. And we're saving the file and we're jumping to the HTML page. Here we are at the HTML page. We're going to refresh the page now. So this is 120 points. It's so big. Looks okay though, but it's bigger than everything. So let's jump back to the code and return it back to 60 points. Okay, we've returned it back to 60 points. We have saved the file and we are jumping back to the HTML page. Here we are at the HTML page. Now we want to refresh it. Now it looks better. The column gap property. The gap property expands the gap between the columns. Let's say between column 1 and 2, the property helps to expand the gap or shrink the gaps. We have 3 columns here. We have 2 gaps in between the 3 columns. Let's jump back to the code and see how we can increase or decrease the gaps. Here we are at the code. Now we're going to increase the column gap. Let's give it 100 pixels. We save the file and jump back to the HTML page. Now let's refresh the page. So you can see at 100 pixels, the gaps has increased. So let's jump back to the code and make some more changes. Here we are in the code. Let's try to change the padding size of the grid item. Right now it's 20 pixels. Let's make it 60 pixels. We save the file and we jump right back to the HTML page. Now let's refresh the HTML. So you can see it has increased, changing it to 60 pixels. Now let's jump back to the code and see other changes we can make. Here we are in the code. Let's change the font size of the grid item to 80 pixels. Let's save the file and jump back to the HTML page. Here we are at the HTML page. Let's refresh the page now. So you can see the font size has been changed to 80 pixels. The align self property. The align self property center aligns the selected flex item in the middle of the container. So this is a flex item we're trying to align up and down. Right now it's down. We're going to move it to the top and center as well. Let's jump back to the code and make some changes. Here we are inside the code. I've created a document type HTML for the align self property. I've opened a HTML head style and all the way to the end, I've closed the style and closed the head as well as the HTML finally. So let's go back to the style. So right from the style, I'm going to select everything within the style. Okay, now I've selected the style and going back to the top. Right from the top, I declared a body selector where I declared everything I want to see within the body, such as the font family, text decoration color, background color, padding left, and padding right. And right below it, I have a set of text formatting here, and the H1, which is the topic, I gave it this color value. For the H1 font size, I gave it 60 points. For the paragraph font size, I gave it 20 points. And for the paragraph color, I gave it this color value. So further down, I declared a flex container where flex is assigned to its display and 200 pixels is assigned to its height. This color value is assigned to its background color. And further down, I declare the actual flex container that is within the div, and I gave this color value to its background color. The actual border color, I gave this color value. The width is 100 pixels. The margin is 10 pixels. Text align, I put it at the center, and the line height is 75 pixels. Font size is 30 pixels. So further down, I close the style. Now let's go further down to the body. Right in the body, I'm just going to highlight for you to see the body area. So this is everything we have within the body area. We have, as we have declared on top, we had the topic inside the H1, we have the paragraph, we have the div that contains all our classes such as the flex container. We have div 1, div 2, we have div 4 that has a style. And this style now align it to the left flex end. This is where we want to alter the align self property. So at the moment, we have the alignment set to flex end. So I'm going to comment out this flex end and change it to center. Okay, I'm going to uncomment the center. So right now I've uncomment the center and I'm going to save the file and jump back to the HTML page. Here we are at the HTML page. I'm going to refresh the page now. So you can see it has aligned itself to the center. So let's jump back to the code and make some more changes. So right now I'm going to comment the center and uncomment the flex end. Okay, so I'm going to save the file and jump back right to the HTML page. Here we are at the HTML page. I'm just going to refresh the page to see how it has changed. So you can see the changes of how it aligns itself up and down. So we can actually rearrange all these other ones as well. But for this topic, we'll leave it for now. Hopefully in the future, we cover more of align self property.